There have been many attempts to assassinate the President of the United States from the early 19th century to today. These include misfiring guns, an attacker calling himself Jesus, and a president who kept talking despite being shot. From Andrew Jackson to Donald Trump, here are the presidents who survived assassination attempts.
An Idaho man charged with trying to kill President Obama claims he is the second coming of Christ.
Andrew Jackson. In the early 19th century, one of his constituents had never seriously threatened a US president. That all changed on one fateful day in 1835 when a homeless house painter named Richard Lawrence pulled the trigger on President Andrew Jackson at a congressional funeral. The gun misfired, saving Jackson's life. However, Jackson was understandably enraged about the whole thing, so he proceeded to beat Lawrence with his walking cane. Lawrence then misfired again, and before he could fire the third time, he was swiftly taken down by the president's aides. Even when the dust settled, this incident lingered in the back of Jackson's mind, and the president became increasingly concerned that a political rival had sent Lawrence. This seems like a reasonable suspicion, considering Jackson was stirring up a lot of controversy at the time, but Lawrence probably had no connection to Jackson's enemies. Abraham Lincoln, the first president of the United States and the 16th president too, was killed, and this happened to be Abraham Lincoln. It happened on Good Friday, April 14, 1865, at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., just past 10:15 in the evening. John Wilkes Booth of Maryland, actor and dogged advocate for the Southern cause. Booth dealt with the Confederate Secret Service but was never directly involved with the Confederate Army. Booth had earlier planned to kidnap Lincoln in 1864 to exchange him for Confederate prisoners in prison. This was similar to Thomas N. Conrad's plan that the Confederacy endorsed. Booth's decision to assassinate Lincoln was allegedly provoked by something the American president said in a speech on April 11, 1865, regarding black people's voting rights. Familiar with Lincoln would be attending the play at Ford's. Booth and his colleagues made plans to assassinate Lincoln, Johnson, and Seward at the latter's residence. Lincoln saw our American cousin at Ford's Theater to watch a play. John Wilkes Booth got into the statue box with Mrs. Lincoln, Major Henry Rathbone, and Clara Harris, Rathbone's fiancée. He assassinated Lincoln and aimed and fired a .44 caliber Derringer pistol, which killed him. Rathbone fought with Booth, but Booth lunged at him and stabbed him before he managed to run away. Late into the night, doctors reluctantly tended to the unconscious Lincoln, who had been carried across the street to the Peterson house. Lincoln did not regain consciousness and passed away at 7 a.m. on April 15th after being in a coma for 9 hours. Towards the end, he became more still, and although gasping, his face looked more peaceful. Some accounts say he smiled broadly at his last breath. Historians like Lee Davis have noted Lincoln's peaceful expression at his death. One witness wrote to the New York Times that there was no apparent suffering, just a cessation of breathing. Lincoln's secretary, John Hay, observed that a look of unspeakable peace came over Lincoln's face. The plot to assassinate other officials failed. Seward was only wounded, and Johnson's attacker did not follow through. Booth was on the run for 12 days before Union Army soldiers tracked him down on April 26, 1865, at a farm in Virginia, about 70 miles south of Washington. Booth refused to surrender and was fatally shot by Union cavalryman Boston Corbett. 4 other conspirators were later hanged for their roles in the conspiracy. William Taft. William Howard Taft and Porfirio Diaz are reported to have agreed to meet in 1909. However, the meeting venue was set to be El Paso in Texas and Ciudad Juarez in Chihuahua. Though this was the first time an American president has met a Mexican president, it can also be considered the first time a sitting president has physically crossed into Mexico. Diaz wanted US backing for the 8th presidential run he was planning. Taft agreed to support Diaz, who valued billion-dollar investments from America in Mexico, to get this. It was decided that the piece of land commonly referred to as the Chamizal Strip that would link El Cerro in the United States to Ciudad Juarez in Mexico would neither side display a single facility during the anticipated summit. However, proceeding with such a meeting provided focus on this territory and resulted in assassination threats and several other severe security issues. For security purposes, the Texas Rangers, 4,000 US as well as Mexican troops, the Secret Service agents, the FBI, and the US Marshals were required to address the situation. Also, John Hayes Hammond paid for a private security team of 250 men. Frederick Russell Burnham, a legendary scout, commanded the team. Hammond, a close friend of Taft from Yale University and a former candidate for US vice president in the 1908 presidential election, along with his business partner Burnham, had significant mining interests in Mexico. On October 16th, the day of the summit, Burnham and Private C.R. Moore, a Texas Ranger, discovered 52-year-old Julius Bergeson holding a concealed palm pistol near the El Paso Chamber of Commerce building along the procession route. Burnham and Moore captured and disarmed Bergeson just a few feet away from Taft and Diaz. Theodore Roosevelt. Even though Roosevelt got through his plan of serving 2 terms in the White House early in 1909, he went for a 3rd term and scheduled a big campaign speech in Milwaukee in 1912. One day, when Roosevelt was speaking to the public, a barkeep by the name of John Schrank pulled a gun and shot Roosevelt in the chest. Quite surprisingly, the bullet targeted and penetrated the folded version of a speech from the President Roosevelt, which he had included within his breast pocket beside his glasses case. The shot penetrated Roosevelt's chest but did not kill him. The speech papers and glasses case presumably helped to slow the bullet down. So, what did Roosevelt do? He continued giving his speech, seemingly unfazed by the bullet in his chest. He even pulled out the bloodied papers, held them up to the crowd, and announced, "You see, it takes more than 1 bullet to kill a bull moose." After finishing the speech, Roosevelt went to the hospital for treatment and recovered, while Schrank spent the rest of his life in a mental hospital. Roosevelt later remarked, "I do not care a rap for being shot, it is a trade risk." Warren G. Harding. An example of presidential-initiated cross-national contact was President Harding's Voyage of Understanding in June 1923, when he toured the nation to contact people and sell his policies. Indeed, on this trip, he made a historic visit to the territory, now the state of Alaska, which is only the 2nd one in US history. The scandal was brewing in Harding's administration in Washington, D.C. and Alaska, and he got a telegram that described the unlawful deeds of his cabinet that he had never known about. In the first week of August, in the southern part of Alaska through British Columbia, Harding came down with what was thought to be a severe case of food poisoning. He delivered his last speech at the University of Washington Stadium in Seattle. A potentially provocative address planned for Portland, Oregon, was called off. His train went on to San Francisco. When reaching the Palace Hotel in G. Pitching, South Dakota, Harding came down with pneumonia and in his room at 7:35 p.m. on August 2, 1923, possibly a stroke or a heart attack. The announcement published in the New York Times read, "A stroke of apoplexy was the cause of death." He had been ill for a whole week. Naval physicians suggested Harding had a heart attack, but his medical advisor, Surgeon General Charles E. Sawyer, disagreed. Harding's wife, Florence, refused permission for an autopsy, leading to speculation that he had been the victim of a plot, possibly involving Florence due to his alleged infidelity. Gaston Means, an amateur historian and gadfly, wrote in his book, The Strange Death of President Harding, 1930, that the circumstances of Harding's death led to suspicions of poisoning. Several individuals connected to Harding would have benefited from his death, as they faced potential disgrace from Harding's imminent impeachment, according to Means. Herbert Hoover. From the start of his presidency, Herbert Hoover was at risk of being assassinated, and, before the month was out, someone did try to murder the new president-elect. Later in November, Hoover set off on a goodwill tour of Latin America, hoping to spread a message of peace to our southern neighbors. But not everyone felt so peaceful. A man named Severino Di Giovanni and his allies felt the president-elect's visit was a perfect opportunity to get revenge on the United States. Once Di Giovanni deduced that Hoover was going to ride a train from Chile to Argentina, he arranged to have explosives planted on the railroad tracks. The plot was discovered, and the bombers were all arrested before anything could be put into motion. As for Hoover, he appeared remarkably undisturbed by the whole commotion. If you thought it was shocking that Herbert Hoover was at risk of assassination, brace yourself. What you're about to discover about Franklin D. Roosevelt's life will blow your mind. Imagine navigating the Great Depression and World War II while battling polio that left you paralyzed and surviving an assassination attempt in between. Franklin Roosevelt. President Franklin Roosevelt faced many unprecedented challenges. He survived the Great Depression, World War II, and in between, and he contracted polio that rendered him immobile from the waist down. However, all this is attributed to FDR's holding policies, courage, and stability as a president, which made him among the most important presidents in the US. Still, it all could have ended tragically one day in 1933. Down in Miami, the new president-elect was giving a speech to a massive crowd. Amid the record flock of 25,000 observers, an unemployed man named Giuseppe Zangara had just purchased an $8 pistol. According to later reports, Zangara said he had no problem with FDR personally, but claimed he hated, quote, all officials and anyone rich. As soon as Zangara had a clear shot, he screamed out, quote, too many people are starving, and fired 6 rounds at the president-elect. A bystander intervened and he missed FDR. I knew he was shooting at the president, so I took my right arm and pushed the pistol up just as hard as I could. His bullets went through 5 other people, including visiting Chicago Mayor Anton Kermack, who died from his wounds. The crowd swiftly took down Zangara and might have killed him if a calm and composed FDR hadn't told them to let the authorities handle the assassin. FDR went on to devote his presidency to ending the Great Depression. James A. Garfield. The shooting of James A. Garfield, the 20th President of the United States, began at the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad Station in Washington, D.C. at 9:20 in the morning of July 2, 1881, just about 3.5 months after he assumed power. Soon after reaching the train station, a writer and lawyer, Charles J. Guiteau, aimed at him with a .442 Webley British Bulldog revolver, which is a type of handgun. The first bullet only ricocheted across Garfield's face and only wounded him on the shoulder, while the second bullet penetrated Garfield's back. Garfield suffered pain and discomfort in the ensuing 11 weeks, succumbing to his infections from the physician's unwashed fingers probing his wound on September 19, 1881 at 10:35 p.m. He lived 79 days after being shot. Guiteau was arrested immediately. Following the state trial starting from November 14, 1881 to January 25, 1882, he was convicted and condemned to death. An appeal was turned down, and following that, Rhodes was hanged on June 30, 1882, 2 days short of the first anniversary of the shooting. If Guiteau's trial and autopsy were examined, he was proclaimed to be mentally ill or suffering from neurosyphilis. He said he shot Garfield out of frustration, that he was not given the position of ambassador to France, and he wanted his speech to sway people to vote for Garfield in the election. Harry S. Truman. During the Jewish fight for independence in Palestine, before the formation of the present state of Israel in mid-1947, the Zionist terrorist group Lehi planned to send letter bombs to the president at the White House and other officials of the United States. Although this did not reach the public domain during Truman's presidency, his daughter, Margaret Truman, published the information in her book, First Women of the Republic, in 1972. The situation was described in the memoir of Ira R.T. Smith, with such letters having earlier been sent to top British officials and Leahy taking responsibility for the act. British intelligence brought the matter to the notice of the Secret Service. The letters intended for delivery to President Truman were intercepted by the White House mailroom, and the Secret Service later managed to dismantle them. On November 1, 1950, the 2 Puerto Rican independentists, Oscar Collazo and Griselio Torresola, tried to kill President Truman at Blair House since he was living there due to White House refurbishing. During the attack, Torresola shot and critically wounded White House policeman Joseph Downs and killed White House policeman Leslie Kofalt. Kofalt fired 1 shot towards Torresola's head and killed him instantly. Collazo shot another officer in the foot before being shot in the stomach. Collazo was badly injured and survived, though Kofalt died from his injuries the following morning after 4 hours. Free from any harm, Truman was, however, in a very risky situation. For the crime, Collazo was tried and condemned to death. However, Truman substituted it with life imprisonment. On September 3, 1979, President Jimmy Carter reduced Collazo's sentence to time served. Richard Nixon. The shooting dead of John F. Kennedy in 1963 has remained one of the blackest in the calendar of the majority of the people of the United States of America. JFK stands in rank as the final US president to die by assassination, but he was not the only president to have a shot fired at him. 10 years later, a man who used to be a salesman of tires named Samuel Bike attempted to assassinate President Richard Nixon. Before this, Bike had picketed the White House wearing a Santa Claus outfit. His grand scheme was to take over a passenger plane and force the pilots to fly the plane into the White House to assassinate Nixon. Instead, the attack did not get very far. Even before the plane could fall, the police wounded him and he later committed suicide. Nixon resigned the same year due to the Watergate scandal, saying, "I shall resign from the presidency effective at noon tomorrow." What do you think about the fact that Richard Nixon faced an assassination attempt even after JFK's assassination was still fresh in everyone's minds? Let us know in the comments. Gerald Ford. In mid-August 1974, Muharrem Kurbegovich, also known as the Alphabet Bomber, announced he planned to come to Washington, D.C. and throw a nerve gas bomb at President Gerald Ford, who had just been in office for 10 days. Within a day, the CIA, the US Secret Service, and other law enforcement agencies working out of the White House basement identified Kurbegovich and arrested him on August 20th. They determined his identity using a CIA voice analysis of his tapes and court records from cases involving his previous targets, the judge and the police commissioners. On September 5, 1975, at the northern grounds of the California state capitol, Lynette Squeaky Fromm, a follower of Charles Manson, pulled a Colt M1911 0.45 caliber pistol on Ford when he reached to shake her hand in a crowd. She had 4 cartridges in the pistol's magazine, but none in the firing chamber, so the gun did not fire. Secret Service agent Larry Buendorf quickly restrained her. Fromm was sentenced to life in prison, but was released on August 14, 2009, 2 years and 8 months after Ford's death in 2006. On September 22, 1975, in San Francisco, only 17 days after Fromm's attempt, Sarah Jane Moore fired a revolver at Ford from 40 feet away. A bystander, Oliver Sipple, grabbed Moore's arm, causing her shot to miss Ford and hit a building wall, slightly injuring taxi driver John Ludwig. Moore was tried and convicted in federal court and sentenced to life in prison. She was paroled on December 31, 2007, after serving more than 30 years, 1 year and 5 days after Ford's natural death. These 2 assassination attempts in September 1975 are the only known cases of women attempting to assassinate an American president. Jimmy Carter. Raymond Lee Harvey, an unemployed drifter from Ohio, had walked onto the stage to assassinate President Jimmy Carter when he was giving a speech at the Civic Center Mall in Los Angeles on May 5, 1979, but he was arrested by the Secret Service in Kansas City 10 minutes before the presidential speech. Harvey had a starter pistol loaded with blanks on him at the time of his arrest. He was a lunatic, but he had to be heard since he reported that he was part of a 4-man team planning to eliminate the president. Harvey stated that he had fired 7 blanks from the starter pistol, which he had on the roof of the hotel the previous night as a build-up to assessing the decibel level. He also said he was with one of the other conspirators, who he knew as Julio. Later, the man was named Osvaldo Espinosa Ortiz, a 21-year-old from Mexico, an illegal immigrant. Harvey tests positive to have 8 cartridges in his pocket that have been fired and 70 cartridges that have remained unfired for the gun at the time of his arrest. Since Harvey had no fixed place to live, he was jailed and the bond was set at $50,000. Ortiz, who was said to be detained as a material witness, was either held with $100,000 or for burglary from a car $50,000. Finally, the accusations against them were dismissed due to insufficient evidence. John Hinckley Jr. attempted to kill Carter during his re-election campaign but was discouraged. Hinckley would go on to attempt to assassinate President Ronald Reagan in March of the same year. Ronald Reagan. In 1976, John Hinckley Jr. became dangerously fixated on actress Jodie Foster after watching the film Taxi Driver, in which she was only 12 years old. Hinckley wrote numerous letters to Foster, traveled to Connecticut to see her, and even attempted to call her. His obsession grew darker when he decided to kill the President of the United States for her. In 1980, Hinckley tried to follow President Jimmy Carter, but was arrested for carrying guns near a Carter campaign stop. Undeterred, he bought additional firearms. His obsession culminated in 1981 when he tracked the new president, Ronald Reagan, to the Hilton Hotel in Washington, D.C. Hinckley fired a series of bullets, although they did not explode as intended. One bullet struck Reagan's chest. Other bullets wounded a Secret Service agent, a police officer, and Press Secretary James Brady. Reagan survived the shooting. The courts determined that Hinckley was insane and sentenced him to a mental hospital, where he remained until his release in 2016. George H.W. Bush. The first president, George H.W. Bush, also lasted 4 years in power without being involved in any attempt on his life, but life after the presidency was a different thing altogether. April 13, 1993, 14 Kuwaiti and Iraqi men thought to be working for Saddam Hussein sneaked bombs into Kuwait intending to assassinate the former president using a car bomb during his visit to Kuwait University 3 months after leaving office in January 1993. Bush was in Kuwait to cheer with other members of the coalition over Iraq that the Persian Gulf War caused. Kuwaiti authorities said they had foiled the plot and that the intended killers are in custody. During that time, his entourage included his wife and 2 sons, James A. Baker, III, Secretary of State, John Sununu, former Chief of Staff, and Nicholas F. Brady, former Treasury Secretary. Out of the 17 people detained by Kuwait's authorities, 2 of the suspects, Wali Abdulhadi Ghazali and Raad Abdel Amir al-Assadi, eventually recanted their statements in court, saying that they were forced to do so. All but one of the accused were found guilty by the Kuwait court. In response, Bill Clinton, the president at that time, authorized a cruise missile strike on an Iraqi intelligence facility located in the Mansour district of Baghdad. The alleged assassination plot was used as one of the justifications for the Iraq Resolution, which authorized the 2003 US invasion of Iraq. An analysis by the CIA's Counterterrorism Center suggested that Kuwaiti authorities might have fabricated the plot. However, at the time, the FBI determined that the Iraqi Intelligence Service, IIS, directed the plot, and the CIA received information indicating that Saddam Hussein had authorized the attempt to retaliate against the US, punish Kuwait for its cooperation with the US, and deter other Arab states from intervening in Iraq. On April 12, 1993, the day before the attack, US Ambassador to the UN, Madeleine Albright, presented evidence of the Iraqi plot to the UN Security Council in hopes of securing international support. Bill Clinton. On January 21, 1994, Ronald Gene Barber, a retired military officer and freelance writer, planned to kill President Clinton while he was jogging. Barber went back to Florida a week later without carrying out the attack, as Clinton was on a state visit to Russia at the time. Barber was sentenced to 5 years in prison and released in 1998. On October 29, 1994, Francisco Martin Duran fired at least 29 shots from a 7.62 by 39mm Type 56 semi-automatic rifle at the White House, aiming from a fence overlooking the North Lawn. He mistakenly believed Clinton was among the men in dark suits outside, although Clinton was inside then. Tourists Harry Rakoski, Ken Davis, and Robert Haynes tackled Duran before anyone was harmed. Duran, who had a suicide note in his pocket, was sentenced to 40 years in prison. In November 1994, Osama bin Laden recruited Ramzi Youssef, the mastermind behind the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, to try to assassinate Clinton. However, Youssef decided that security would be too tight and chose instead to target Pope John Paul II. On November 24th, playing at the APEC summit in Manila, Clinton's cavalcade was redirected to a different route following the Secret Service's interception of a message of an impending assassination. An intelligence team a few days later discovered a live bomb hidden under one of the bridges. It was established that the plan was coordinated by the Arab terrorist Osama bin Laden, who operated from Afghanistan. October 2018, a pipe bomb was sent to Hillary Clinton and arrived at their home in Chappaqua, New York. However, it was caught by the Secret Service. It was one of several similar packages sent to other Democratic leaders that week, including former President Barack Obama. Bill was at home when the package reached him. The same was not true for Hill, who was in Florida campaigning then. Fingerprint DNA proved that the Florida resident Cesar Sayok was the sender of the bombs. Sayok was arrested 2 days after the package was intercepted on October 26, 2018. Despite the prosecutors asking the court to sentence him to life imprisonment, the judge put him behind bars for 20 years. George W. Bush. On May 10, 2005, during President Bush's speech in Tbilisi, Georgia, Vladimir Arutyunian tossed a live Soviet-made RGD-5 hand grenade onto the platform. The grenade did not detonate because it was wrapped in a red tartan handkerchief, preventing the safety mechanism from being released. Arutyunian originally evaded capture but was apprehended in July 2005 after killing an Interior Ministry agent. He was convicted in January 2006 and sentenced to life in prison. Shihab Ahmed Shihab, an Iraqi citizen residing in Columbus, Ohio, was arrested on May 24, 2022 for allegedly conspiring to kill former President Bush. This scheme was discovered through chats with undercover FBI agents. Shihab was also accused of immigration crimes and planning to smuggle Iraqi nationals into the US to aid in the plot. He claimed connections to former ISIS members, including Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and an ex-ISIS financial chief from whom he planned to launder money through a car dealership in Columbus. In February, Shihab and an informant conducted surveillance at the Bush home in Dallas and the George W. Bush Institute. He had entered the US illegally in September 2020 using false identification and claimed to have been involved in killing American service members in Iraq from 2003 to 2006. His motivation for the assassination plot was reportedly anger over the Iraq War. Barack Obama. As the first black president of the United States, Barack Obama received more death threats than many other prominent personalities. However, 3 particular assassination attempts made the news. The first incident occurred in 2009 when President Obama visited the Alliance of Civilization Summit in Istanbul. A Syrian guy was caught carrying phony press credentials and confessed to trying to attack Obama with a knife. In 2011, a young man named Oscar Ortega Hernandez used an assault weapon to attack the White House, making the scenario even more uncommon. Ortega Hernandez identified himself as the modern-day Jesus Christ.
An Idaho man charged with trying to kill President Obama claims he is the second coming of Christ,
and claimed it was his divine duty to assassinate Obama, whom he saw as the Antichrist. He was eventually sentenced to 25 years in prison. The strangest case unfolded in 2013 when typewritten letters containing a suspicious substance were sent to Obama. The substance was identified as ricin, a deadly poison. Paul Kevin Curtis, an Elvis impersonator, was arrested and charged but was found innocent. The charges were then transferred to Curtis's online rival, James Dutschke, who Curtis claimed had framed him. The bizarre story concluded with Dutschke receiving a 25-year prison sentence. If you thought the assassination attempt on Barack Obama was surprising, brace yourself because we're about to reveal a recent attack on Donald Trump in July 2024. Donald Trump. During his presidency from 2017 to 2021 and his third presidential campaign in 2024, Donald Trump encountered 4 assassination attempts. In September 2017, while visiting the Endeavor Mandan refinery in North Dakota, Gregory Lee Lanegang tried to use a forklift to overturn Trump's presidential vehicle. However, the forklift got stuck before reaching the motorcade, and Lanegang was apprehended after attempting to flee. In the fall of 2018, William Clyde Allen III tried to kill Trump by mailing letters containing ground castor seeds, which hold the biotoxin ricin. Another attempt came in 2020 when Canadian Pascal Ferrier sent a ricin-laced letter to Trump. Authorities intercepted both letters before reaching the president. In July 2024, during a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, Trump was on stage when gunshots rang out. Trump, hit by a projectile, grabbed at his bleeding ear and fell to the ground as Secret Service agents rushed to protect him. Law enforcement fired at the attacker's location, while Secret Service agents moved Trump to safety in an armored vehicle. Trump was declared to be okay following the shooting. According to the Associated Press, the assailant found on a rooftop over 140 yards from the rally site was killed by Secret Service agents. Additionally, one attendee at the rally was also killed. Throughout history, US presidents have faced many dangers, from early attempts to modern threats. Their experiences show how delicate democracy can be and highlight the strong dedication of those who lead the country.